Everything you believe to be real begins and ends in the mind, not as a comfortable philosophical metaphor, but as a disturbing fact that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You look around and see shapes, bodies, objects, distances, and movement. Yet what you truly experience are not things, but observations organized by an internal system of interpretation. The mind does not observe the universe as it is. It constructs a functional version of it, and then forgets that it was the one that created it. From this forgetting arises the most powerful illusion ever sustained by humanity: the belief that there exists a solid, independent, objective world, separate from the one who observes it. But the only reality ever accessible has always been mental, and everything we call matter is nothing more than a stable narrative, built to prevent psychological collapse in the face of the unknown. For centuries, we sought outside what had always been within. We turned to gods, temples, and dogmas to explain the meaning of life and the structure of the world, until a decisive moment in human history arrived, when the authority of tradition was wounded by an idea impossible to accept. When Galileo Galilei stated that Earth did not occupy the center of the cosmos, he did not merely challenge the Church. He forced humanity to confront something far deeper: the fallibility of perception itself. From that moment on, physics assumed the role of a new interpreter of reality, promising to reveal the universe as a precise, predictable machine external to the human mind. With Isaac Newton, this machine gained laws, forces, and particles. Yet what few realize is that Newton himself knew these concepts were merely useful instruments, not final descriptions of reality. He feared that belief in bodies possessing absolute existence would lead humanity into an irreversible error, because by making matter self-sufficient, any need for an underlying mental or spiritual principle was erased. Long before that, however, the ancients had already touched this truth without experiments or equations. Pythagoras claimed that all things are number, and numbers possess no mass, texture, or physical location. They exist only as mental entities. This means the foundation of reality was never material, but relational, abstract, and intelligible. Matter has always been the final effect, never the cause. This intuition traveled across centuries until, in the early 20th century, modern physics found itself cornered by its own discoveries. Quantum mechanics revealed something impossible to ignore. The observer is not outside the phenomenon, but participates in it. Reality does not fully manifest until it is observed, and what we call a particle or a wave does not exist as a thing in itself, but as a pattern dependent on observation. This conclusion led some of the greatest physicists in history to statements that sound almost heretical. James Jeans declared that the universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine, suggesting that the mind is not a byproduct of matter, but the foundation from which matter emerges. Arthur Eddington acknowledged the deep discomfort this idea caused among physicists, for accepting that the substrate of everything is mental requires abandoning the security of classical objectivity. In the interpretation defended by Niels Bohr, there are no particles traveling through space and no waves propagating through an invisible medium. There are only observed events, records, clicks, occurrences that acquire meaning only when a mind interprets them. Reality is not something that happens and is then perceived. It happens through perception. Language, however, betrays us. We speak of particles because our psychology demands solid, localized, identifiable things. We invent objects to avoid facing the abyss of pure abstraction. Yet what experiments reveal are only statistical patterns, probability distributions, and collapses that occur not by mechanical action of the environment, but because observation, or the absence of it, redefines the state of the system. Attempts to preserve an independent material world, such as the idea of decoherence, produce no new physics. They produce only psychological comfort. In experiments where nothing is observed, the wave function collapses not due to physical interference, but because the mind registers nothing. The universe responds to consciousness, not the other way around. Since Ibn al-Haytham, we have believed that light enters the eyes and creates internal images, but this view is incomplete. Perception is not passive reception. It is active construction. You do not see the world as it is. You organize, interpret, and stabilize it to make it inhabitable. Seeing is a mental act, not an optical one. And when this understanding is carried to its ultimate consequences, all attempts to explain reality solely through physical mechanisms reveal themselves as insufficient. Physics, from this point forward, can no longer help. It reaches a limit beyond which only philosophical choices remain: denial, spiritualization, or silence. The teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus echo through time with almost cruel simplicity. All is mind, not as symbolism, not as poetry, but as the fundamental structure of reality. The universe is not matter that produces consciousness. It is consciousness that projects the appearance of matter. Accepting this does not necessarily lead to solipsism, but to a profound liberation from obsession with things. Whoever understands that nothing exists beyond observations stands far ahead of those who spend their lives trying to discover what things are made of, because they realize the question was wrong from the very beginning. The universe is immaterial, mental, and spiritual, not in the traditional religious sense, but in the most radical sense possible. It does not exist apart from the mind that perceives it. To live in light of this understanding is not to lose the world, but to finally see it without illusions. Reality becomes strange, yes, but also elegant, simple, and silently beautiful. You are not inside the universe, observing it from the outside. You are a point of consciousness through which the universe observes itself. Live, perceive, and enjoy, because in the end, what you call reality is not a thing. It is a thought in motion.